The Ghost of Iraq is Knocking on Cuba's Door by Darrell Allen II. How fear, trauma, and political narratives continue to shape America's perception of enemies was in high school when the September 11 attacks happened. I remember sitting in photography class when we watched the second plane hit the South Tower live on television. My high school even had a photography class, which feels strange looking back now. Looking back, I think our time would have been better dedicated to learning how to code instead of taking random pictures of girls around the school. I can still remember the eerie atmosphere with my fellow C students in the room, watching Matt Lauer try to make sense of the situation because, like him, the audience was just as lost. Everyone was silent, which says something about a voluble high school class that usually never stopped making noise. It felt like the country had stopped breathing. The images from that day will never leave me. I remember seeing people in Manhattan covered in concrete dust, walking through the streets in shock. I remember the photograph of the man falling from the tower. Those images stay with a person for life because they represent helplessness. I also remember how completely the government and media took over everyday life after the attacks. Television stations suspended regular programming. Radio stations became dominated by non-stop news coverage and patriotic messaging. Fear consumed the country. The only other time in my life I have seen the government intervene so deeply into daily life was during the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time, I had never heard of Osama bin Laden, but I immediately hated him because of what happened. Like many Americans, I found comfort when President George W. Bush stood on top of the rubble in Manhattan with a bullhorn and promised justice. At that moment, Bush appeared heroic to much of the country. The nation wanted strength, revenge, and reassurance after experiencing collective trauma. However, my view of Bush and U.S. involvement in wars changed when we invaded Iraq in 2003. The nexus between Iraq and 9/11 never fully made sense to me because there was little evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the attacks. Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda were not natural allies. Saddam led a secular Ba'athist government, while al-Qaeda promoted radical Islamist ideology. Despite this, the Bush administration repeatedly connected Iraq, terrorism, and weapons of mass destruction in the public imagination. This connection did not make sense even to a C student like me. Did anyone take the time to think, and don't get me wrong, some certainly did, why Saddam would support bin Laden when he feared another U.S. intervention? Saddam did not care about spreading Islam or maintain an enduring grievance against the United States even after Desert Storm. Saddam cared about himself. In hindsight, it appears that fear created the political environment necessary to justify the invasion. The administration argued that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction that could eventually fall into terrorist hands. Many Americans accepted these claims because the trauma of 9/11 lowered skepticism and increased public willingness to support military action. According to Pew Research Center, many Americans later admitted they incorrectly believed Iraq was directly connected to the 9/11 attacks, or that weapons of mass destruction had been discovered. Ironically, a politically smarter move may have been to re-partner with Saddam Hussein to enlist his help in eliminating al-Qaeda. Saddam's secular government viewed radical Islamist organizations as threats to its own stability. Such a move could have potentially saved the United States from expending the enormous amount of resources required to keep Iraq together after the invasion, while also allowing greater focus on fully dismantling al-Qaeda. Instead, the invasion destabilized Iraq, created power vacuums, and contributed to years of insurgency and regional instability. This pattern is not unique to Iraq. American history contains several examples where fear and perceived threats were used to build support for military escalation. One major example was the Gulf of Tonkin incident during the Vietnam War. The Johnson administration used reports of attacks against American naval vessels to secure congressional authorization for greater military involvement in Vietnam. Later evidence raised serious doubts about portions of the official narrative. The article, The Truth About Tonkin, discusses how uncertainty and confusion surrounding the incident contributed to a major expansion of the war. We all know how Vietnam ended, with the loss of over 50,000 young American men, countless Vietnamese and Cambodian deaths, and the establishment of the communist regime the United States was trying to avoid. Another theme connected to this discussion is the idea of illusion in politics and society, which I explored in my previous article, Coffee Break, Theater, Optics, and the Illusion of Success. In that article, I argued that governments rely on carefully constructed public images that conceal true motives. After 9/11, the United States entered a period where fear and patriotism created powerful national unity, but that unity also produced illusions. Many Americans believed the invasion of Iraq was directly tied to the attacks, even though evidence supporting such claims remained weak. The government presented the war as a necessary defensive action tied to weapons of mass destruction and terrorism, while critics argued the motivations were broader and included geopolitical influence, oil, and unfinished political objectives from the Gulf War era. The concept of illusion does not mean every threat is fake or every government action is deceptive. Rather, it suggests that societies often construct simplified narratives during moments of crisis because populations emotionally struggle with uncertainty and complexity. Fear creates a desire for clarity, certainty, and enemies that can be clearly identified. Governments understand this dynamic and sometimes use it to build public support for policies that might otherwise face greater scrutiny. This same dynamic appears in modern geopolitical rhetoric surrounding Cuba, Iran, China, and other adversaries. Headlines emphasizing military drones, cyber threats, or foreign aggression often contain elements of truth, but they can also create exaggerated public perceptions disconnected from the actual strategic balance of power. Recently, I read an article in the Daily Mail, which can produce excellent content that mainstream media outlets like CNN ignore. In my personal opinion, it is easy to discount outlets like the Daily Mail simply because of their reputation or style. But sometimes smaller or less respected outlets are willing to discuss issues that larger organizations overlook or avoid. The article claimed Cuba received 300 military drones that could potentially threaten Florida or Guantanamo Bay. This is only a claim based on intelligence. This intelligence the Daily Mail claims to have could be completely hogwash. While such headlines sound alarming, it is important to place them into strategic context. Since the Cuban Missile Crisis, Cuba has not represented a major military threat to the United States. Even if Cuba obtained hundreds of drones, the United States still maintains overwhelming military superiority through its Air Force, Navy, intelligence capabilities, cyber systems, and missile defense infrastructure. Seriously, 300 drones are unlikely to represent a meaningful strategic threat to the United States. Any Cuban drone operation launched directly against the U.S. mainland would almost certainly be intercepted long before reaching South Florida due to America's overwhelming air defense, naval, intelligence, and surveillance capabilities. In reality, the individuals responsible for authorizing such an attack would likely be dead or neutralized before the operation could fully unfold. Cuba simply does not possess the military capacity to wage a conventional attack against the United States. Ultimately, the broader lesson is not simply about Cuba, Iraq, or even 9/11 itself. It is about the responsibility citizens have to think critically when reading articles or listening to late-night news opinion shows that sell fear and geopolitical tension. As I said in my article, the window is closing. NATO's opportunity to end the war in Ukraine. Trump is looking to leave a legacy. Forcing a change in Cuba's government, the same government the United States has opposed for over 60 years, would solidify Trump as a formidable mover of American policy, not someone sitting on the sidelines like previous presidents who allowed North Korea to obtain nuclear weapons, failed to kill bin Laden before 9/11, allowed ISIS to foster into a major threat in the Middle East, or not doing much to deter Russia from invading Ukraine. While this may be viewed as a good policy move, in reality, is Cuba truly a military threat to the United States that requires intervention or escalation? Can a nation with limited military capabilities realistically challenge the most powerful military force in human history? These are the kinds of questions people should carefully consider before supporting policies that could lead to conflict. Conflict always has consequences, even if they do not directly affect your life. Take the time to determine whether your government is selling you a sham before supporting its policies. Saddam was a very bad person, satanic, but he was not a threat to the United States. Cuba has a terrible government, but it is not a threat either. The ghost of Iraq should haunt Cuba. Thank you for listening to the latest article from Daryl Allen II. Please consider commenting, sharing, and subscribing.